Hello, and welcome to the second lecture of week one. And today's lecture will be on history of Western advertising and the structure of an ad agency. So before 1900s, what was advertising like? Well, I'm going to show you what it was like in the Western world. In Great Britain, in the 1700s, the advertising basically promoted products and services and used handbills. Handbills are pamphlets or they're posters. And one of the biggest campaigns was advertising the New World, asking for immigrants to leave Britain and move to Australia, America, or Canada. And 100 years after that, if we look at the early 1800s, in North America, it was still mostly a rural nation. What that means is that most Americans didn't live in cities, but they lived on farms. And there was not much need for advertising because people were basically using money to survive and not buying products. In the middle of the 1800s, printing technology grew and advertising started. And there was an ad for an agency in 1840s by Volney B. Palmer that advertised his coal and advertising agency. In the 1880s, what happened was that the factories started producing their own products at the factory and packaging them there. So what that means is once they started packaging their products, they started to think about branding. What was happening at that same time was that transportation was improving and products were moving from one city to another area, and that was through trains or by roads. So what that meant is that you needed national advertising because you had the same product being available in different areas. So advertising evolved from just telling people about the product and changed into something that would persuade consumers. And one of the most advertised products were these snake oils, were medicines. And they used to lie, basically, and say things like these products would cure cancer. And people started to distrust advertising because of this. So other companies and brands that sold food and cars and stuff like that, they realized that it was important to build trust with your consumer so that they would buy your product not just once, but they would keep buying your product. And that is when that thinking started. And I would argue that that's when the modern era of advertising began. Here is an example of a national advertising campaign that appeared in newspapers and magazines, and it is for cigarettes. Cigarettes, before they were banned or heavily regulated, they were one of the categories where most advertising dollars or pounds were spent. And this is for Camels cigarettes. And they ended up becoming the number one brand of cigarettes in America. And this campaign was running in all different cities across the USA. In the early 1900s, the thinking was that if you said something in an ad, then you owned what was said in the ad. And you preempted your competition from saying it. So here's an example of, again, another cigarette ad. And this brand called Lucky Strike said to women, light a Lucky and you'll never miss sweets that make you fat. So they were selling cigarettes as a way to lose weight. And because Lucky Strike said that first, they owned that or claimed that benefit. And so other brands wouldn't say that. They would find something else to say. Here's an example of another ad from that same period. It's a very famous ad because it impacted a lot of people. The headline says, "They laughed when I sat down at the piano, but when I started to play." And then the story is all about how this man didn't really have a life. Then he started to learn how to play piano, and then he was able to get more friends and date. And so this is an ad for learning how to play musical instruments. Notice the amount of text. At that period, there were not many channels and places to put advertising. And remember, I told you in the last lecture about how people nowadays see 5,000 messages a day. And before, in this period, they would have seen like 200 ads or less a day. So people had time to read advertising copy. In the 1950s, in America and in Britain, the agencies started using USP to create their advertising messages. And what USP is, unique selling proposition. What that means is that you say what is unique about your product that nobody else can say. A very famous USP is for M&Ms or Smarties. And the tagline is M&Ms melt in your mouth, not in your hands. Because chocolates, if you put chocolates in your hands, they would melt. But M&Ms no, because they have the hard candy coating. So that was unique to their product. Here's another example of a USP, and this is for a bread called Wonder Bread. And they claimed that they had 12 ways to build strong bodies because they would have vitamins inside and minerals, and that would help build up children's bodies. And they said that first, so they owned that claim, and also it was unique to them because they put vitamins in their bread and other brands didn't. In the 1960s, advertising became more visual, and it's known as the golden age of advertising. That happened in America, in Madison Avenue, and then in the late 60s, early 70s in Great Britain. And this guy called Bill Bernbach, who's one of my heroes, he decided to put art people together with copy. Copy is the word we use for words. And he, before him, the copywriters are the ones that came up with the idea, then went to another floor and then gave the text to an artist and they just drew up the ad. But the art was not important. It was more the words. Bill Bernbach decided to put art directors and writers together. And that is the standard that we have today. So an art director and writer work together, come up with the idea, and visuals have become a lot more important because, again, we have so many ads that it's easier to see them and look at the image than read the words. Another ad campaign that was very visual was for Marlboro cigarettes. Yes, another cigarette campaign. I'm not trying to get you guys to smoke, but cigarette advertising was very creative, and it's a great way to reflect what was happening in the culture when the ads were created and broadcast. And this is for Marlboro. Originally, Marlboro was a cigarette for women, and when they decided they'd market to men, Leo Burnett came up with the idea of having a cowboy. In the 1970s, what happened, and this was in Great Britain, it was called, and America, it was called the positioning. And that's where you would position your product in the consumer's mind against the other products in the same category. So, for example, if you look at the left-hand corner, there's an ad for Avis. Avis is a rent-a-car, and Avis is only number 2. So why go with us? And what they're saying is because they're number 2 and they're not number 1, when you're number 2, you try harder. So they were positioning in the consumer's mind that they were not number 1, they were number 2. But because of that, you got better service because they tried harder because they wanted to be number 1. Next to it, there's an ad for Wendy's, which is a hamburger chain. And what they positioned themselves against McDonald's hamburgers is that Wendy's said they had a lot more beef or a lot more meat in their hamburgers. So that's how they positioned themselves against McDonald's, that they offered more meat in their burgers. In the 1980s, advertising became very smart. And what happened was that they became simpler and they rewarded the consumer for figuring out what the ad was about. Here's another ad for cigarettes, sorry, but I think it's one of the most creative and best advertising campaigns ever done in the UK. And do any of you know what the name of this brand is? Well, the name of the brand is Silk Cut. So when you as a consumer were walking along the street and you saw this incredible, gorgeous visual, and it didn't look like typical advertising, but you knew it was advertising, but it didn't look like it. And then you were trying to figure out what it was for. And then you realized that it was for Silk Cut cigarettes. You as a consumer felt very smart and intelligent. It was like a reward. Now, also look at the ads from how they've changed in 80 years. Before, they had time to put a lot of copy and the consumers read. But now, because there's so many ads, advertising has become simpler and very single-minded. So, and that is because of, consumers only remember 3 or 4 ads. So the simpler you make your message, the easier it is to remember. And that's the same in public relations and advertising. You have to have a simple message. You kiss your work. And this Silk Cut ad has definitely been kissed. Keep it simple, stupid. In the 1990s, the internet was invented, and these are examples of the first banner ads. The first banner ad came out in 1993. The first clickable banner ad, came out in 1993. The 1990s to now, digital became very, very, grew and grew and grew, and started taking money from analog media. And what happened was that, and this is when I was working in advertising during this period, there were advertising agencies that just did digital advertising, and there were separate agencies for traditional advertising. They were considered separate. Luckily, in my career, I was creative director of both digital advertising and traditional advertising. And I used to work for BBDO, which is one of the biggest ad agencies in the world with head office in New York, where I worked for a bit. And I was the head of BBDO advertising, traditional, which is television, radio, and print. And also I was the head of BBDO digital, where we did mostly banner advertising and some web pages. But nobody thought that digital would be as big as it is now then. So they allowed me to do both. In 2020, what is happening in advertising and PR is that we have this thing called convergence, where everything is coming together and blending. So digital is now being removed. So you don't have BBDO digital. You just have the advertising agency BBDO. And what's important now is the creative idea comes first, and then the media is selected. What used to happen when I first got into advertising, I was told, Carl, you have to do a TV commercial and a print ad. And then I'd have to figure out an advertising message that would work in print and TV. And now what happens is that you come up with your big idea first, and then the media is selected. And in tomorrow's class that you guys have, which is media with Phil and Eleftheria, you will understand more about how media works. And advertising campaigns now, and also public relation campaigns, are integrated. And what that means is that if you're doing a campaign, you will maybe create your TV commercial, then with the same big idea, then you will do a social media ad, then you'll do your press release, and then you'll do a PR event. But they all have the same idea behind them. And we are going to talk a lot about this over your next 3 years. You guys will learn how to create integrated campaigns in both PR and advertising. And of course, now in 2020, content is king. Content in social media, content for Instagram, content to share online, content, an event or guerrilla advertising is done, and then you will have a hashtag and you want people to take pictures and then share that event online. All that is content. And I will be teaching you that in this module, and also next year and the year after that. So again, content is king, and you're going to be learning about content and integrated advertising. Now what I just want to do quickly is show you a campaign that was very famous, and it was an ad that was a piece of content. Let's take a look at it. I hope the audio worked for that. Oops. I hope the audio worked for that. And if not, I will post a separate link so you can see that commercial by itself. But that ad was only shown on YouTube, and they did not buy any media space, which means they didn't pay for it to be shown on television or in cinemas or anything like that. They just put it on YouTube. So they paid for it to be filmed. They paid a celebrity, and that guy is Van Damme. And then they put it on YouTube, and it got over 87 million views for free because people liked it and they shared it. So remember my first lecture, and I talked about methods of advertising and tools and techniques. This ad became viral and was shared around the world for only the cost of the commercial. So you can see how advertising has changed. Those early ads that I showed you of the guy sitting at the piano and everybody was laughing beforehand, they had to buy space to put that in magazines. Now you can create an ad, and if people like it, they will share it. And that is a big challenge. So now let me quickly talk about the agency structure. This is the typical advertising agency. At the top, you have the president in red. Then on the left, you have the creative services, of which I was the head of. I was the vice president creative director, and I had writers, I had art directors, print production people, people that filmed TV commercials and web production. That was under me. You go over to the purple, and that is account services. And those people deal directly with the client, and they look after the strategy. And then you go over to the green area, and those are marketing services. You have media planning and research. So what research does is they will research into the consumer and the brand, find an insight, and then they work with the account services in creating the strategy. And then the final color, blue, on the right, are the people that actually work in the office and look after everybody else who's working on the advertising. The people in the blue look after the people in the yellow, the purple, and the green. Now I'm going to show you an example of the people I used to work with at Grey Canada in Toronto. And I was the VP Creative Director of the country of Canada, and that was Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. We were pitching the Honda Civic account, Honda cars. So when we were creating our pitch, we had to tell the client who was going to be working on their account. So at the top, we have Anne. She was the president of the company, wonderful woman. Used my creative people to retouch all her photography, so she looks a lot younger than she really was. Then underneath, we have Joaquin. He worked on the accounts. Then Anne U Pam from India, and he worked on planning and research. So he would research brands and consumers. And then we had Matt, who was from Poland, and he was our junior account person. And then we said if we got the Honda account, we would hire an account director. Now let's go to my area. I was the VP Creative Director. Then I had the following people working with me. Gerald, who's my art director. Shane, he was the senior copywriter. Then I said if they gave me the account, I would hire a junior team. Also, I looked after digital. So I had Josh working with me and Todd and Amy, who were the junior team. And then I also looked after production. So I was looking after print production, and Vicky did that. Then TV production, people that would film and take pictures, and that was David. And then I worked with the digital people, Toby, Christopher, who's a programmer, and then Alice, and she was in charge of keeping us all in order and remembering dates and times. And then I would have hired 2 new people. So there I've just sort of shown you the type of people that would work on one account, and that was for Honda Cars in Canada. And that's just for advertising. And of course, there would be in a separate agency for public relations. And Andy will talk about public relations in another lecture. So where do we work when we do advertising? Well, we work everywhere. We don't just work for selling products. We also work for nonprofits or NGOs, non-government organizations. We work for the private sector. We work for companies, for cars. We work for banks. We also work in the public sector, so like the NHS or advertising insurance. We work in-house. So a lot of brands have their own advertising agencies within their companies, so they don't hire an ad agency, they just create one in-house. So companies like John Lewis, which is a department store chain in Britain, they have a small in-house, and those people would work on small ads and catalogs and the web, and then they would hire a big advertising agency to do their TV advertising. And then, the industries we work in oil and gas, financial services, healthcare, government is a big advertiser. In Canada, the one entity that spends the most money on advertising is the Canadian government. They spend over $1 billion a year. And then after that is Ford and Procter & Gamble. So governments have a lot of money and they spend a lot on communications. Look at what the British government or your governments have been doing during the corona crisis and how much messaging they have done to tell us all to wear masks, to wash your hands, and to stay 2 meters apart. Political parties, culture, all those need advertising and message creation. And of course, public relations as well. But Andy will talk about that in another lecture. I'm just talking about advertising right now. So when we create advertising and in public relations, we follow this structure. And this structure is very important for you guys to know because you will be following this over your 3 years here in this course. So first of all, we do the strategy. And in order to do a strategy, you do research first, so you understand the brand and the people you're speaking to. Strategy also involves planning the campaign, the objectives, who's it talking to. Then the creative idea. The creative idea is the interpretation of the strategy. And the creative idea is the big idea. You're going to be hearing me using that word a lot, the big idea. What's your big idea? That is, what is the central idea in all the PR and advertising? Once you've got your central idea, then you have to execute it, which means filming the TV commercial or taking the pictures of your celebrity who's selling the watches. And that is a whole separate world in itself. And of course, you have a budget from the client to spend your money on doing that. After you've done the execution, the media is where you broadcast the message. YouTube is a media. Newspapers are a media. And in your class tomorrow with Eleutheria and Phil, you're going to be listening to 12 weeks of how media is important to broadcasting messages of both PR and advertising. Once you've created your advertising campaign and it is broadcast, advertising campaigns and PR campaigns need to be evaluated. Was your campaign successful? Did it reach the objectives you had? Did it talk to the target market? Did they receive it or not? And you do that so that when you do other campaigns, you can make them even better. So this structure I've told you, you'll be doing for the next 3 years, and we're going to be focusing on that. I've only talked about it for 3 minutes. We're going to be going into detail on how to do this. And you guys in your 3rd year, when you graduate, will be creating your whole own campaign, and you will be doing all these steps on your own. And it's going to be amazing. It's called The Final Project. You will love it, and you will do incredible. I am telling you now, you'll do great. So what do you guys think are the biggest benefit of advertising to society? Think about where you are now, the country or city or town or village or mountain or beach where you are. And when you've seen advertising, what do you think is the biggest benefit? Just think about it. Write it down on a piece of paper if you have one. Okay, so what the biggest benefit of advertising are that advertising pays for many things that we take for granted. For example, social media is free. You don't pay for Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, because brands pay for that, because they advertise to you. Also, in many cities, newspapers are for free. So if you get on the train or the bus in the morning, you have free newspapers, or when you come home at night. Also, a lot of magazines are free because they carry advertising. Also, a lot of bus stops. Those buildings, those things that protect you from the rain and sun, are not paid for by your government. They are paid for by media companies. And the reason they build a bus stop is so they can put advertising there. And the fact that brands put ads there pays for the construction of that bus shelter. And of course, many TV channels are free because they have advertising, and radio is free, and podcasts are free. So there's a lot of content that is free that is paid for by advertising. Even some buildings like stadiums are paid for by advertising. So thank you very much for allowing me to talk to you today about the history of advertising and then the structure of agencies. And that's it for me. So thank you very much. And you have a great day or evening or morning, wherever you're looking at this.